Okay, so this is the last bit of this chapter on coupled infrastructures, and we are going to build on the discussion we had here in terms of coupled infrastructure. So even though this is an example of a social ecological system with some resource, could be water or fisheries in our example, and we looked at the design principles, understood from long enduring institutions. It's not theoretically made up, but this is learned from observing long enduring institutions that were studied for sustainable resource harvesting. So here we are going to talk about robustness of coupled infrastructure systems, where coupled infrastructure systems experience many type of disturbances. For example, weather, insect outbreaks, and earthquakes can impact the shared resource systems as well as the hard public infrastructure. So you have earthquakes destroying, having massive destruction in Turkey last year, I think, and a historic town actually got completely wiped out. There's a lot of rich history there in the Ottoman Empire times and so on in Turkey, and you have had landslides and earthquakes wiping out towns elsewhere, and we'll see the example from Chile in a minute. Weather impacts are now becoming more and more common, wiping out crops at a very recoverable time scales, but also making the long-lasting droughts, wiping out livelihoods, and you have pest outbreaks, which can also be like crop damages, or you can have mosquito-borne disease outbreaks, etc. We can think of many examples where you have shared resource systems being affected, or the hard public infrastructure being affected. Again, you have to remember the concept from adaptation, where you always build things for acceptable and unacceptable risks. So when you build a road or a bridge, it's expected that it will not get wiped out by every heavy rain event or little storm, but it will be allowed to break down under earthquakes, which are called acceptable risks. And then there are details about who holds responsibilities for unacceptable risks. It will be the infrastructure provider, since we talked about that in this case here, and the government will be responsible for repairing if there is an earthquake, which is, act of God, as the insurance companies call it. External changes imposed by higher levels of governance can impact the soft public infrastructure, resource users, and public infrastructure providers, as well as cause changes in prices of inputs and outputs, infectious diseases, and technological innovations. So you can get external changes. Here we were talking about external changes being imposed either on resources themselves. So if it's water or fisheries, you can imagine how climate change affects the resource itself. And there are external forces that affect resource users, let's say increased demand because of immigration, or reduced availability due to infrastructure changes or infrastructure breakdown, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine many linked interactions between the components of the coupled infrastructure, which is what we are trying to analyze here in the IAD framework, right? So robustness then refers to the capacity of a particular coupled infrastructure system, let's say the water supply system or the inland fisheries system, to cope with such shocks and continue to deliver benefit streams. So resilience is when the system functioning is severely degraded, but you build it for recovering quickly and being functional again. So resilient infrastructure is something that is, let's say, modular, or it has used other risk-informed design principles to make it resilient to perturbations which are expected, whereas robust is something that has safety factors built in, that it will not lose functionality even when there is a cyclone or a hurricane, or in the case of soft infrastructure, there are technological changes related to software, network protocols or whatever else. If a coupled infrastructure system is to be robust, a disturbance should not fundamentally disrupt the functionality of the system, and the system should regain its basic performance relatively quickly. So you can imagine this in many coupled infrastructure contexts, as we'll see in a minute from hurricanes in the US. Earthquakes can cause major damage. In the early months of 2010, there were two major earthquakes. A magnitude 7 earthquake destroyed the hard and soft infrastructure of Haiti on January 12, 2010, and it was a devastation, especially since Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. Years after the quake, many people still live in camps, and some with only basic sanitation. So they have never fully recovered, and the system in this sense has not shown good resilience, definitely no robustness. The total death toll is not known, but is believed to be beyond 50,000 for a small country. That's a massive fraction of the population. And if the infrastructure and basic sanitation, etc., are not rebuilt, that means the economy has not fully recovered and come back to its functionality such as it is, considering it's a poor country. So it is a system that has essentially not regained functionality at all, either socially, economically, or infrastructure otherwise, right? In contrast, on February 27, 2010, Chile experienced an earthquake with magnitude of 8.8. Remember, this is a log scale, so 7 to 8.8 is a massive increase in magnitude, which is much stronger than what Haiti experienced, obviously. Yet the total number of fatalities was only 497. You don't want to discount the number of deaths, but compared to more than 50,000, 497 is a very modest number, mainly due to a tsunami caused by the quake. In other words, it's not the quake-related building damages that killed people. The tsunami caused the earthquake caused a tsunami, which is common based on what kind of earthquake it is, how the water gets displaced and whether it produces a tsunami. And a tsunami can be something hard to deal with, so almost 500 people lost their lives in that. A year after the earthquake, most of the damage, including damage to roads and bridges, was repaired. Why? Because Chile experiences earthquakes more frequently. They are well aware of their vulnerability to earthquakes, and building codes, etc., have been set in place so that infrastructure, living quarters, and other public assets and public services are designed to remain as functional as possible even during an earthquake. And this is a good example in comparing Haiti versus Chile, that actually coupled infrastructure system robustness is a concept that is very important. Resilience is also important. Robustness is especially also important for maintaining functionality during the impact itself. And risk information here in terms of knowing earthquakes and earthquake risks obviously helped build coupled infrastructure systems that are robust in Chile. Other examples come from New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Hurricane Sandy hit New York in, I think, 2011 or so. New Orleans is in the Gulf of Mexico, is in the hurricane belt, where the hurricanes born typically in the tropical Atlantic migrate westward and northward, often get into the Gulf of Mexico where the waters are very warm, or they are born sometimes in the Gulf of Mexico, and either way they can rapidly intensify. And Hurricane Katrina at the time was one of the most intense. It was forecasted and it was not managed well at all, and then there was a cascade of failures in the coupled infrastructure, with the drainage systems, the pumps and so on failing, and basically the city experienced unexpectedly high damage. You can see the road here disappearing underwater, entire large neighborhoods underwater, and poor people paid a heavy price. They were put up in a sports stadium for a while, and then there were all kinds of mismanagements in terms of recovering from the disaster itself. Many people got displaced and apparently never have come back. Rich people managed better, but many rich people moved because they didn't want to face this again, and so on. So in that sense, the vulnerability of New Orleans to hurricanes is not unknown, and yet the system was not set up, the coupled infrastructure systems were not set up to deal with this, and it isn't clear whether it is any more resilient today to such a devastation as it was during the time of Katrina. Sandy was much more of a surprise, where the cyclone hurricane went north, became extratropical by that latitude, and then took a quick left turn and crashed into New York and New Jersey, and they were not at all prepared for this. The storm surge, inundation, wind damage, power outages, houses exploding because of not turning off gas lines, etc., caused damage that left, really sad, bad, devastating memories for the people. Many reports and books got written about this particular event, and whether now those systems are more resilient, again, more robust, is not so obvious. But as the tropics warm and the tropics expand, the hurricanes are intensifying more, and they are rapidly intensifying, hanging around the coast and dumping more rain, and they are coming further up north because of the expanding tropics and so on. So obviously robustness and resilience of coupled infrastructure become very critical in this context. Okay, so that's basically the chapter in terms of coupled infrastructures. We looked briefly at institutional analysis of coupled infrastructures. We'll come back and apply these concepts now within this context of systems perspective as a section of this book, the last section. So we are pretty close to the end of the book now. Infrastructure may be taken for granted, but it's critical to generate the services and resources we need for our daily lives. This is the critical reflections. There are different ways we can organize the creation and maintenance of infrastructure, and the institutional arrangements, which are the soft infrastructure in terms of planning, design, implementation, risk information generation, etc. And these affect the robustness of the coupled infrastructure systems. Right? The main goal is, now we keep talking about resilience, adaptation, and so on, but this book is now emphasizing the robustness of the coupled infrastructure systems with the design principles in mind that we just looked at and we had looked at before. So in this context, make yourself think, who paid for the creation and maintenance of the roads you take to campus? Assuming you're a student and you're taking this course, how is the electricity, or reading the book, how is the electricity generated that you use at home? Is it renewable? Is it fossil fuel? Is it coal? Where is the power plant located? Where are the grids? How robust is the grid system, considering the climate change happening in your area or vulnerability to other natural hazards? Maintenance of roads is paid largely from gasoline tax. What are the consequences of more energy efficient and even electric vehicles for the continued maintenance of the road infrastructure? In other words, these are the cascades you have to think of in terms of interactions between the components of the coupled infrastructure here, which is roads and transportation. If you are relying on fossil fuel gasoline tax income for maintaining the roads, and you're pushing the system towards energy efficiency and electric vehicles to reduce emissions, which is a goal that is about mitigation, climate change mitigation, then how do you plan for alternative sources for maintaining the road infrastructure? So this is about contingency planning, saying we will reduce emissions and push energy efficiency as well as electric vehicles, and we will have to generate income to maintain the road infrastructures, because you are not imagining that you will be reducing the demand for the roads, or that the roads have been built with a certain volume and population in mind, and you need to continue to serve them, but now your gasoline tax revenues are dropping. So that's a kind of interesting question as well, right? So let's close this chapter out here and then come back and move to the next chapter, which is what is the next chapter? I should be aware, but I keep doing many things, so I sometimes forget. As you notice, I keep recording these podcasts as I find time, so it's not like I'm sitting and recording the whole thing in one session or continuously, because it can take me months and months to do this as I keep squeezing in podcasts and sometimes not being careful about how I organize the camera, etc. So this is chapter 14 about this is the same section, so it's called Think Globally, Act Locally ? So this is again about sustaining the commons and avoiding the tragedy of the commons and driving towards the triumph of the commons. Okay, so I'll come back and discuss that.